any course that's like, or any training that's like basically making quote unquote whiteness the amulet of destruction, like any course that says the problem is whiteness and it defines whiteness as everything from love of the written word. This is real. I'm not making this up. Love of the written word, or showing up on time, or perfectionism, as if people of all backgrounds aren't prone to perfectionism, right? So any training that like sets up this dichotomy or this easy heuristic that says all the things we do not like, we are putting into a category called whiteness, and you should dismantle it, hate it, reject it, try to defeat it. Any course that does that is perpetuating racism.
Test.
Do you take all of this down after every episode?
Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
Not this stuff, but the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
Test 1 2 1 2. Okay. So speaking of music,
yes,
and your music career, I want to start with it's probably one of the most controversial things that you've ever said.
Okay, hit me.
You said that I am obsessed with Beyonce and aspire to be her best friend one day. And the reason I say this is controversial is because if we're talking befriending pop stars,
sure,
to me, Rihanna would be the one that I would go after as a friend.
I love Rihanna.
So I love her too. I hope she's listening. But for you, what is it about Beyonce that, like, there's so many obvious things about her, like her singing, she's gorgeous. She carries herself fiercely, you know?
Yeah.
She's very fierce.
Yeah.
What is it to you specifically that draws you to Beyonce?
It's interesting because post Rihanna's Super Bowl performance, I would also say the same thing about Rihanna. Just to say that. But I think I said this about Beyonce around the time that Lemonade came out, her album where she, I would argue, was probably the most vulnerable she's ever been as an artist. And also around that same time was when her Coachella performance happened. And also after that, Black is King came out on Disney Plus, which is just probably, in my opinion, the greatest thing Beyonce has ever produced. And so those three, like the trinity of Beyonce, really just made me realize that Beyonce is not just a, pop artist in the sort of transactional sort of way. She was actually very much saying something in those three presentations. In Lemonade, she was very Jungian, actually. And I haven't listened to Lemonade in a while, so this is I'm gonna have to rack my memory. But I have that album on vinyl and everything, and I only buy albums on vinyl if I really, really love the album.
So I know the spark notes of Lemonade because I never listened to it full through. But
oh my god,
she's singing about Jay-Z cheating on her.
Yeah.
And that is the through line of the album. Like, it's not just one song where she's exposing him. It's like an entire saga of her experience.
It's like an arc. So the beginning of the album is like her experiencing the stage of anger. And that's when you get like that fierceness in songs like, well, I don't remember the names of the songs, but where she says things like, they don't love you like I love you, and I ain't sorry, like all of these, she's like arriving in her full anger and rage. And then as the album continues, she sort of goes into sadness and reflection and longing for her husband, and this realization that like a lot of his escapades have nothing to do with her, but have more to do with like him not being in integrity with himself, and then like probing those questions and like how can we as a couple actually navigate that and get real about that. And then in the final act, they sort of come to this reconciliatory moment where they are able to work through it and learn things about each other, learn things about themselves, grow together. And at the same time that she's telling this story about her relationship with Jay-Z, if you watch the music videos that go along with this presentation, she's also telling a story about Black America. She's telling the same story of like descent, sorrow, and then resurrection. And these are very, these are themes that are like cyclical in the human experience, but they're also very much a part of the if any of those listening to this podcast are super into Carl Jung, my worldview is very much informed by a Jungian landscape or Jungian lens, which emphasizes those cycles that happen throughout the human experience. So she does that in a meta way. So she portrays it when she's speaking about her own personal relationship with Jay-Z, but she also portrays it when speaking about the larger experience of Black America. And then she continues on that theme in Coachella, which is more just like her Coachella performance is just like a continuation of that resurrection, homecoming, like. Yeah. And I also grew up in the South, so a lot of the themes aesthetically that are in her Coachella performance, like I grew up with. So when she emphasizes like the marching bands, and I don't know if you've seen her Coachella performance, another spectacular.
I've seen clips of it, but I have not seen it full through.
So if you remember like the marching bands, like that is like the centerpiece, I would say, of the performance. Like that is what it's like to attend a football game at a Southern HBCU and even a Southern Black high school. So like I grew up watching that and experiencing that, and so to see it, on the Coachella stage as she presented it was really quite beautiful.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things that I've been doing recently, music wise, is just turning on the live sets, like Lemonade. Yeah. I don't know if was it a Lemonade set at Coachella or was it just
No, she performed a lot of her songs. She performed like songs from her entire her entire collection.
Okay, yeah, because I was gonna say, just for whatever reason, I feel like just watching the live set of an artist taps into something that just listening to them doesn't. Like more recently, I watched Rufus Du Sol perform at Joshua Tree, and I saw
Rufus Du Sol perform at Mirage. We probably have totally different stories about Rufus Du Sol. So
I saw them live twice. Once at Governor's Ball here in New York, and then once at Red Rocks in Denver, which is my favorite concert venue. But the Joshua Tree performance was actually, there was no crowd. It was during the pandemic. They're just banging out on the rocks, the sand, and
that's awesome.
Whatever it is, like I'm just like sometimes I'll just throw it on and listen to it and have it on a screen while I work out and just like kind of vibe out to it. But I don't know. I feel like the live performance, like seeing a full set live, and then on top of it, if they tie it together in some way, having like these piecemeal aspects, like sometimes there'll be dialogue in between songs, or like you were watching the story on the graphics board behind them. There's like something about it that I feel like it's more than just seeing them on video. It's like so different because it's only gonna happen, like I think that's what I was thinking about, like this is only gonna happen once. They could perform here thousands of times at Joshua Tree, but this performance will only happen like this one time, and it'll be different every other time they do it.
So I haven't actually seen Beyonce live. I've only seen all these things through the medium of the television.
You have to see her live if you're going to be her best friend. That's something she's going to care about.
I think that's
she's
right.
going to be like, look, you have to support me in person if this is going to work.
I will be like, I'm talking to you in person right now, and I support you.
Yeah.
No, but I haven't seen it. I haven't seen her performance live, but I do think that perhaps these particular performances spoke to me also because of my own like culture and background, and perhaps I'm able to relate to it in ways that people who, let's say, didn't have like the Southern football experience might not be able to relate to. Yeah,
that was my Southern football experience.
Okay.
Friday Night Lights,
yeah. So like it's also like specific to each of us as human beings and all of our idiosyncrasies. But of course, I would love to see her live at some point.
So Lemonade, she really went through the entire saga of reconciling with the cheating. You said she started in that anger stage. She went to the, like missing Jay-Z, going through that whole sequence. That's such a, like, I don't know, if I cheated on someone that was as public as Beyonce, and I had to take a deal. Like I know she's my life partner. I know there's no other relationship that's going to make me feel as fulfilled as I'm with this person. But they gave me a deal and said, if you stay with me, my next album is just going to be about you cheating on me and all the things that went along with it, and like no holds bar. I don't know if I would take that deal. I feel like it would be a very tough decision. Like, I'd be curious. I'm sure Jay-Z has spoken about it, obviously, but just to like be there the first time that he was listening to it, or he's driving in the car and Lemonade comes on and he's just like, damn, I did do that shit. Like, that's fucking wild.
Yeah, I mean, Jay-Z is also, you know, this phenomenon whose body of work has been pretty vulnerable. So I think when looked at through that lens, it's not that surprising to me to know that he was like willing to do it. Yeah. I think that vulnerability has been a part of his just like way of being as, you know, perhaps the greatest rapper of all time. So yeah, he just he understood that like this is the stuff that creates great art. It's like real life, and it's real darkness, and it's real messiness, and it's real shit that is the composting for great art.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the fact that Jay-Z is also an artist himself, one of the greatest of all time at what he does, and Beyonce, same thing. I feel like that definitely would help with the understanding of what that other person is doing with the album. Like, if he was an accountant or something and Beyonce released an album, I feel like you just wouldn't have the capacity to enter a level of understanding where you're like, okay, this is what she's doing. She's making music. Music is about what happened in her life. I was a piece of shit. I cheated on her. Like, that is where art comes from. But if you're someone who is not familiar with that process, I feel like, or even if you were an artist in a different way, I feel like it would be much harder to comprehend why she is doing it. Like, you might just be like, why is she doing this to me? But like Jay-Z is like, I feel like it's almost like when a fighter gets punched in the face by someone who's also a really good fighter at the same level, and there's kind of like a nod to them sometimes in the UFC ring where someone lands a shot and they're like, all right, like they're just like, okay,
it's like respect.
Like I feel like Jay-Z, maybe when he maybe not the first time he heard it, but eventually he gave her like that nod, like, all right, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea, but I would guess that that's what happened, you know.
Yeah.
But
so you mentioned you grew up down south. Where did you grow up exactly?
I grew up in New Orleans.
That's wild.
Is it? People respond that way often, and I'm like, yeah.
I was down in New Orleans for my birthday weekend last year. My girlfriend bought me a ticket to go down to New Orleans for Halloween weekend.
Oh, that's quite a weekend to go to New Orleans.
It was the first parade that they had back since COVID, October 2022. And
wow,
it wasn't like Mardi Gras level of ridiculous. I've seen the videos from Mardi Gras, so you know, there was a lot less flashing, but it was still like outrageous compared to going to a parade in New York City or something. Like, it was just like completely different, the level of drinking. Like, I found myself walking around sometimes, and I've never had more fun people watching than in New Orleans, and just like wondering what that person does for a living. Like, you see so many different types of people, and not just like in New York, I feel like you have categories where you're like, okay, businessman, teacher, musician. And then I see people in New Orleans and I'm like, are you a magician slash chef? Like, like, what are you, like, I have no idea what you do. Like, are you doing card tricks while you're filleting meat for people? Like, what it, so I feel like it must have, obviously growing up there is a whole different experience than being there for 2 days. But what did you think of, or what do you think of your experience growing up in New Orleans now looking back on?
I have many things to say about this, because I was just in New Orleans last week, and my sisters graduated from high school, so I went to go celebrate that. And New Orleans is such an interesting phenomenon. New Orleans is like a French, Spanish, super Catholic just like very Creole and European and Native American and super black town. It's like truly a gumbo.
Yeah.
And now I want you to take that and think about what I'm going to say next in context. I grew up in a, and this is reductive, but I grew up in a Protestant, anti-Catholic home.
Protestant. Okay, that makes me think of the show Dairy Girls.
Oh, I haven't seen that show.
Basically, it's like about the what is it? The Irish Catholic Wars or the Protestant Catholic Wars in Ireland.
Yeah.
That Dairy Girls is the extent of my like Protestant anti-Catholic knowledge.
Okay.
But your family was Protestant anti-Catholic.
And what I mean simply by Protestant is protests.
Oh, okay.
So the protest culture that is America, which we can get into if you want later, but the protest culture that is basically America's religion comes from Protestantism. It is in the word itself. And so I grew up in a home and attending a church that did not believe in mainstream Christian things like Christmas or Easter, which were sort of, I won't say invented by the Catholic Church, but certainly drawn up by the Catholic Church, I'll say.
So this is a Protestant church,
basically.
And is this church unique in its denial of Christmas and other holidays?
Yes.
But it's like not all Protestants.
Most Protestant churches are down with Christmas and down with it. So this is like deeply.
So
we're
this
really
one
protesting.
church like saw Santa Claus and was like, "Fuck that shit!" Like, no
exactly.
shot.
Exactly,
Yeah.
hard pass.
When their kids are born in that church, they just tell their kids like right out of the womb, like Santa Claus isn't real.
Santa Claus is not real, and you're not attending that Christmas party that your friends are attending either.
100%.
You're not down for that. So this combined with the fact that I didn't grow up eating shellfish. Remember, this is New Orleans, so this is like a city on the sea, right on the Gulf of Mexico, full of shellfish.
Capital of the solar system.
Exactly. So I didn't grow up eating shellfish, shrimp, lobster, crawfish, etc. Because the church that I attended believed that we were supposed to observe all the basic rules of the Old Testament. So not eating pork and not eating shellfish. So I grew up not eating pork or shellfish, not observing all of the mainstream Christian or Catholic festivals in a deeply Catholic town. And the way in which that affected me later on in my life, I mean, when I was a child, I was very like dogmatic and down with that whole idea because it was just like all I knew, and it sort of separated me from my peers and it made me feel unique and all these things. But like as I grew up and grew older, it actually made me realize that I had a sense of alienation with my environment. Like imagine being born and raised in a place and then being conditioned to develop your identity against that place that is your home.
Yeah. Like if I grew up in New York and wasn't allowed to eat pizza, I'd be like, fuck New York. Like, fuck this
crazy.
shit. Yeah, that's insane.
Think about that.
That's basically like what happened to you.
Yeah, think about that. So I was at home, like I said last week, and I had a very different experience of New Orleans because, like, you know, I'm older now. I'm walking my own path. I'm on my own journey in terms of a relationship with the divine. And let me tell you, I had so much shellfish. It was fantastic.
Hell yeah.
I frequented the French Quarter and loved seeing and hearing the music. I mean, the music is in me. That part was never really, stamped out of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting experience to realize that you've been experiencing alienation for a while and didn't realize that that was what you were experiencing previously. So it's fascinating.
Do you remember the first time you ate shellfish after, I'm assuming you left the church eventually?
Yeah.
Do you remember that first, whatever you had, whether it was like crawfish or sushi, just like the first bite?
I had shellfish here in New York. So I had calamari.
Okay. That's a good one to ease into it because it kind of tastes like it could be other things because it's fried.
Exactly.
And then
the friedness masks like It's a little gross, actually, but yeah, the friedness mask.
Sauce is good. I feel like calamari is dependent on the sauce too. Like if you have a place that has shitty sauce, like it doesn't matter if the calamari is good. But yeah, that's crazy. Like having like not only going to a strict church, but like a church that's its own thing. So you have like you didn't have friends in other churches that were like that, or other mosque, temples, whatever religion, that you could be like, yeah, this is like, I can't believe we're not allowed to.
I had Jews
in the they're not allowed to eat shellfish too,
or pork.
I thought it was only pork. I didn't. So shellfish,
because it's like the Old Testament is the Torah.
Got it.
So yeah, hence why so many Jews are my homies today.
So like if you were having dinner or something, would your parents just invite a lot of Jews over because they're like, all right, same rules for eating, like we have to hang out with people that can eat the same stuff?
Not exactly, but just like I'll give you another example. Like not only did we not eat pork or shellfish, we also observed all of the holy days in the Old Testament. So like Yom Kippur.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're Protestant, anti-Catholic that celebrates Jewish holidays.
That's how I grew up. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is insane.
It's very psychedelic, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, because sometimes like I'll meet people who went to a strict church, like they were very religious when they were younger, their family was, but like their parents were kind of more relaxed outside the church. Like it didn't follow them necessarily into the home. It was just kind of like, you know, my dad went to temple, my dad's dad went to temple. So like we just do it every week. Like, did the strictness follow you into the household? Were your parents like kind of living that, or was there separation?
Super living it.
Really?
Yeah.
That like, so looking back on it now, like that has to be pretty crazy, just like the uniqueness.
Yeah, it's extremely unique.
And strictness, and just kind of like the bizarreness of celebrating holidays of a religion that you don't, like it's part of the Bible, but you don't technically observe that religion, but you're observing the holidays associated with that religion.
Yeah, it's psychedelic is the best word I have to describe it. It's like a different universe in the multiverse.
Yeah. I've had probably like 10% of the intensity of that experience, if that, because I was raised Catholic.
Okay.
My mom's Catholic, my dad's Jewish, so we celebrated both. We celebrated Christmas, Hanukkah, Yom Kippur, like just go down the calendar. Catholic Jewish holidays, and
you must have had a lot of days off.
Well, so so in my town was probably 70% Jewish. So for every Jewish holiday, even if you weren't Jewish, we got off anyway.
Yeah.
So I was like, as a kid, you're just like, I don't give a shit what we're celebrating. Like if I could, you know, hop on my bike at 9 a.m. and go to my friend's house, I'll pray to whatever God is giving me this day.
Will grant me permission.
Yes, please give me more days off.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I remember going to church, but then also going to temple sometimes later that day or later that week. And I also went to probably 35 bar mitzvahs, not because I'm popular, but because literally every other person in my grade was Jewish. And like every other weekend, I'm like, another bar mitzvah. So I did have which was, that could be a whole nother conversation, going to bar mitzvahs, because that was my first introduction into different levels of wealth in society. Like that's when it was apparent to me that I'm like, oh, this, like I just got an iPod mini and a gift bag. Like insane. This kid's parents make so much more than Jared's parents. Like the other party, you get like a sticker and like a paper hat, and I'm just like, okay, like Jared's this kid's parents are killing it. But like I had a little bit of that celebrating both holidays, but in the house, it was more like I would celebrate, but we didn't really have a strict household in a religious sense.
Okay.
and my dad would tell my mom, like, please, like, we don't have to celebrate every single one. Like, it was more my Catholic mom being like, no, it has to be even. Like, we have to celebrate the Jewish holidays.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So when did you start to separate from that religious lifestyle, like going to church, following the rules?
So my first existential crisis was senior year in college when I encountered my liberal agnostic professor, who I put into a box because I also grew up in a conservative home.
Did he celebrate conservative holidays because he was liberal and agnostic? Just another opposite.
Not quite. It was a woman actually, but she was my professor of anthropology. Okay. And the title of the class was Anthropology of Religion, Magic, and Witchcraft. So that was like one of the last classes I took, and she was a agnostic and a liberal, so I prejudged her. And then she, in one incident in class, she showed this documentary called Jesus Camp, which I don't know if you've seen this documentary, but it's like it's about these evangelical parents who send their kids to like Jesus Camp where they learn how to speak in tongues. And it doesn't depict them favorably. And then so we watched this film, and the next day this atheist student in the class starts like railing on these parents, and my anthropology professor, who's liberal and agnostic, starts defending the parents. And she's like, if you don't understand how the human condition develops and works, and how like we're all like really longing for this desire to connect and to love and to be loved and to belong, if you don't understand like how that's operating in this community, and you're just going to judge them, and you're like missing the point of the class. And it actually erupted in a shouting match between these two people. And that's when my existential crisis began, because this person who I had boxed in as other started depicting a Christian love that I had thought she was incapable of. And that led to...
Because you knew she was atheist and agnostic.
Yeah. Like I just assume, oh, you're agnostic, then you have nothing to teach me about God. And if you're liberal, you definitely have nothing to teach me about ethical values.
Was that way of thinking from the teachings or propaganda of the church? Like, was that hammered into your head, like outsiders, whether it's like whoever, atheists, whatever, like they're just like, they don't know, they don't have Christian capacities. Like they're just not going to be the same types of people.
Less atheists than liberals, but both really combined to make for a wonderful, deadly combination.
So it's like, don't normally parents are like, don't go over to this kid's house because, you know, he's a bad example and I don't want him corrupting my child. And parents in your church are like, don't go over to this kid's house because his parents are atheists and they might poison your milk or something.
Basically,
that's funny. So you're watching this shouting match in class.
Yeah.
And did it hit you right then and there? Like, were you just like what is happening? Or was it sort of like a slow release of the crisis occurring to you?
I think it was more of a slow release.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a slow release that led to depression, and then which I wrestled with for many years, and eventually, again, it's like the Beyonce arc.
Yes.
Right?
I can't wait for the album. I feel bad for the next guy you date.
No, not at all. Not at all. I can handle I can carry my melancholy now, but yeah, it was like depression and then melancholy and then, reconstruction. Like I had to reconstruct my sense of self. I had to ask myself, who am I, and what do I actually believe, and like what is my relationship with the divine, and like, but that took a number of years to go through.
Yeah. So like, where do you go from there, having like, once the crisis hits, whether I don't know if it was like weeks or months, whenever you finally had this realization of these, kind of like opposing forces in your life where something, but you're fundamentally tied to the teachings of something else.
Yeah.
How did you practically, like, were you writing things out? Were you talking to friends? Were you spending time in silence? Like, were drinking, like trying to drug it away? Like, because if I had that sort of, I've had other crises, but nothing like that weighty while I was in college. A lot of them came after, where I stopped playing sports and I was like, what the fuck do I do with my life? But like, if I had it in college, I feel like my strategy would have just been like, drink it away, just try to hook up with people, like forget it, just get a job and like push it down. So what were you actually doing to help out with that?
So it's interesting. So this happened senior year, the last semester in college. So like it happened and I was like, okay, I graduated and now I'm off to the real world. And then I moved to New York a month later after this class was over and the college was over. And
where was college, by the way?
University of New Orleans.
New Orleans, okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I moved to New York, I got a job at the Wall Street Journal, and almost immediately I started developing the Theory of Enchantment.
Really?
Yeah. So like the Theory of Enchantment in many ways was my coping mechanism.
That makes sense though. Like having something to work on daily and think about it. I've never thought about podcasting as a coping mechanism, but now that you bring that up, I've definitely had periods of my life the past 5 years since I've been podcasting where I'm like, okay, I don't know what happened on that episode, but I feel like something else in my life got solved a little bit because I talked about it on this podcast. So I can imagine that working on Theory of Enchantment, which we'll get into like the specifics of what it actually is and what it does. Like I can imagine just throwing yourself into that work, you know, while you're working at the Wall Street Journal, and then eventually it's full time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine that helps you solve other things, having a purpose. Because I feel like the things in your life, professionally, spiritually, personally, things kind of emanate from those purposes. Like if you have a solid foundation, you can sort of solve other things just by proxy.
Yeah, it's something to channel it into. Like whether it's the artists making the album or, you know, something else. You can channel it into a giant, massive project like the Theory of Enchantment. You can channel it into a giant, massive project like an album. But you can also channel it by, you know, drinking yourself almost to death.
Yeah.
You can choose the channel that you...
Or you can do both at the same... Like, I've definitely had editing episodes where I'm like, I'm sitting in front of my laptop and I'm just like, I'll just have one drink while I edit. And like 3 hours later, I'm like fucking like passing out my laptop. I'm like, I need to separate this a little bit.
Yeah.
But
that's the other interesting thing that happened. I'm not drinking alcohol this year. I'm like taking a break for a year.
Okay.
And I went home to New Orleans last week, and
that's tough.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like I've been not drinking for now like 6 months, so it's like I'm used to it. I'm used to saying like, no, I'm actually not drinking this year. But I started thinking like, what is it about New Orleans? Like, is New Orleans coping? Like, is there something in the city historically that we've just been coping with for all of our existence? Like, why is alcohol such a huge thing in the city?
Yeah.
And I never thought of that question in that way before last week. So I don't know.
I mean, based on my super limited knowledge of New Orleans, I went on one of the best tours I've ever been on, an Airbnb experience. Shout out to Brittany Cherie. I actually ended up having her on the podcast after that because my mind was so blown.
Yeah.
We went through all of these hauntings that happened in the city of New Orleans that were tied to actual things that were documented in the house. Yeah, and it's like every street we're walking down, she's like, and this is where slaves were experimented on and chopped up. And like, this is where 19 people were murdered in this basement. And I'm like, the murders and human experimentation per capita in New Orleans, like just walking down a random block, is like liquor stores in another city. You're just like, there it is. Like, there. And
by the way, the murder rate today in New Orleans is still exponentially high. One of the highest murder rates in the country.
Really? Okay.
And I thought about this in relationship to how I was raised, and I was like, if my parents grew up in this if my lineage, because my ancestors were slaves in New Orleans for sure, if my lineage came through this and culminated in my immediate family, it is the fact that my immediate family was drawn to and attracted to a Protestant tradition, and this, that had all these things part of it, was that there's like subconscious attempt to free themselves in a way from that, in the energy that is New Orleans.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
The
hauntings,
having some sort of structure to release yourself from, I guess, what would you call it? Not industrial trauma, like citywide shared trauma of just the energy that remains in that area of the world. We were talking about ancestral trauma before we started recording, but one of the things that I was thinking about during the tour is there some sort of energy, some sort of particle that we haven't identified yet that infiltrates objects because of human actions that have occurred in that room? Because there would be rooms that we walked into where before we even found out what happened, there's just this super dark energy, and it's like during the day, like it wasn't scary, but you walk into a room and you're just like, something happened here, and where's that feeling coming from? Because sometimes like we wouldn't know, like, this is even part of the tour, just like walking through somewhere and she's like, oh yeah, by the way, like some woman hung herself on that rafter and killed 3 of her babies, and we're just like, Jesus Christ, like what is there something that stays physically because of, like, maybe when humans are experiencing trauma, like, I don't know, maybe there's like some sort of mark that gets left on an environment that's almost like radiation, where it takes years and years for the half-life to dissolve
it away.
Yeah, exactly. Like, maybe that's not as ridiculous as, like, I thought that if you told me something like someone getting killed has, makes a room have bad vibes, and that, reduces the property value and no one wants to buy it because something happened in that room and it's gonna follow you, I would be like, that's ridiculous. But after I went to New Orleans, I was like, I understand why these haunted houses sit for decades and no one buys them, because you walk in and you're just like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck happened here?
Yeah, I'm reading this very interesting book right now called Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram.
Spell of the Sensuous?
I don't know how to pronounce that word, but yeah.
It sounds right. Sounds right.
It's a really beautiful book, and it talks about a lot of things about, like, really reanimating our relationship to the natural world. It also, like, reinforces this very lost idea that actually everything is natural. Like, everything in this space is actually natural. We just forget because it's made with natural elements and natural ingredients, but we just forget. But the author also talks about how, like, that is how indigenous cultures are in relationship with objects. It's not even perceived as an object, in the sense that it's not even perceived as a fixed, perfect, like, thing. It's perceived as something with energy that's constantly changing, constantly moving, even if it's not perceptible to the human eye. And I think there is a bit of that revealed in quantum physics. On that level. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Like, the whole idea of objects moving and having a life of their own, and I cannot explain this even close to scientifically accurate, but just like the moving atoms in every single object, like everything that surrounds us, if you go small enough, eventually you'll see in a microscope, like, there's life in, not like a life, but in inanimate objects. There's things that are moving around and forces in the universe. And if you didn't know what atoms were or what objects were, you'd look at it and be like, that kind of looks like it's alive when you get close enough. Yeah. So it is wild to think about, like, if something happens close to an object and things are moving around, is there some sort of like energetic secretion that
Like
the
residue.
atoms cling onto, and then now it's just like moving throughout the house. And if that house got burned down or something and it was used for spare parts to make something else, like if you turned a fireplace into like a wooden box or something, does that, like, the object gets the energy gets carried into that new object? Like, what is going on there? I feel like there must be, or not must be, but like just based on the energy, there's something different about walking into certain rooms. And I'd be very curious to see, like, 100 years from now, is there something that we pick up on that's like an actual residue of things that occur?
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at, we were talking about trauma earlier. If you look at trauma, you can perceive generational trauma as that residue that's like carried down or passed down from generation to generation if it's not consciously dealt with. So like that's another example of like what you're articulating, I think. Yeah.
Like biological residue.
Yeah.
Sort of. So what is your, like, could you sort of give me the basic run through of what ancestral trauma is? Because we were also talking a bit about it before, and I told you I listened to this podcast with Whitney Cummings, who's a stand-up comedian. She talks about ancestral trauma. I've never really looked into it, and I'm just curious what you know about ancestral trauma and what the I don't want to say argument for it is, but like for people who write about it, for people who talk about it, what is the thing that makes the trauma? Like, what is the mechanism of ancestral trauma?
I'm trying to think of a good example, and it doesn't have to be. I feel like when we hear the word trauma, it sort of takes on this very dramatic feel or sound to it, and it doesn't have to be like dramatic. I think, like, do you know John Mayer's song "In the Blood"?
Not by name, but I've almost, if it's John Mayer, I've probably shuffled it here or there on a train ride somewhere. Yeah.
So like on a very simple level, in that song, John Mayer says, "How much of my mother has my mother left in me?" So like if my mother is, I don't know, prone to insecurity, and if I'm growing up as a 5-year-old child, all I know is the world of my parents. So I pick up what they're picking up, or I absorb what they're sort of like, how they're behaving and the energy that they're picking up. And if my parents are insecure, which is to say reactive against or towards some specific let's say action of fighting. So let's say they're very much like, we don't like to fight. If you raise your voice in the home, then that's super disrespectful. So like they're very sensitive to raised voices, and they perceive it as a form of disrespect. If I absorb that as a 5-year-old, and I don't, because I'm a 5-year-old, so I'm not going to question it, right? Again, it's like my whole world.
Yeah. You're just bringing up like scholarly articles of the 5-year-old. Like, actually here, it says that raising your voice can actually be beneficial.
Yeah, no, I'm not doing that at all. Unfortunately, I was not that kid genius. As a
that would just be an annoying kid.
That would also,
No,
that would be very bad. But like, if I take that in, as I grow up, I will be probably, the probability that I will be sensitive to people raising their voices will be pretty high. Because that's what I absorbed from my parents. Now, it's interesting because the movie that's going on in my head when I encounter someone raising their voice is different from, or could be different from, the movie going on in the head of the person raising their voice. The person raising their voice may have been raised in an environment where raising your voice and getting into verbal fights was just a natural, healthy part of human expression and human discharge. So their nervous system is not activated in the same way that my nervous system is activated when I hear people raising their voices. So like, is that trauma? I wouldn't call it necessarily trauma. Like, I think that's probably overstated, but it is a way just in which like we pick up the baggage that our parents picked up from their parents, who picked it up from their parents, who picked it up from their parents, and so on and so forth. And unless you become conscious of that, unless you become conscious of the fact that the movie in your head is in fact not objective, it's subjective. And there's nothing that isn't to denigrate the subjective experience, but to recognize that you have autonomy and you have choice over how you choose to relate to what's happening in front of you. If you do not consciously make that decision, or if you're not made aware that you have that choice, then you will live your life in a way that's super oppressive.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense. Like because trauma can be a misleading word. It sounds more like ancestral tuning, like your perceptions are tuned to a certain extent by your parents, by your parents' parents. And the raising voice is a good example, because that took me a while to figure out too, that like people just talk differently or different levels. And there are a lot of people earlier on in my life that I perceived as just angry or pissed off people. And then you meet more people, you do podcasts for hours and hours, and you realize that some people just talk like they're pissed off. Like if you don't, like if you met that person for 5 minutes, you'd be like, wow, that person's having a horrible day. That person's an asshole. And then you meet them for longer, and it's like, oh, this is just like how this person it was tuned by whatever environment they're in, by their genetics / their upbringing. This is them. And so that's crazy. Like having everyone on the planet has different tunage, if that's a word. And somehow we don't all kill each other. We kill some people. Some people are like, I need to kill this person. They're that much of an annoyance. But most people are just, like, the overwhelming majority of people are able to, they have a path in their life that leads them to an understanding of, like, some people are just different. That doesn't mean it's okay. That doesn't mean it's, you have to accept it, but it's like, I understand where this person is coming from or what made them that person. We also just tend to hang out with people who are like us. Yeah. And avoid people who are not like us. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like we have our own friend algorithm, because the algorithm just shows you more of what you want. Yeah. Although YouTube now, I saw they started suggesting, would you like to watch something that's completely different? It's like different than 80% of your choices or something, but they do have that button. So I guess maybe if they had that for friends, that would be good, where you're like, wait, are you sure you want another one of these friends, or would you like to press the button and get a completely different type of person?
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's pros and cons to, like, knowing what your friend frequency is, and, like, just honing in on that frequency, and, like, not wanting to entertain people who are not on that frequency, which is, like, not a disrespect or a slighting of people who are not on your frequency, but it's just like, you're allowed to have preferences.
Yeah. And it is really a frequency, because there is, I don't know exactly what it is, because it's not always the words, it's not always the body language, but sometimes you just meet someone and immediately, I'm gonna get along with this person, or I won't get along with this person, and maybe they've said 3 things, and you're just like, I don't know, dude, like, for whatever reason we should hang out. And you're just like, and they're hopefully like, let's hopefully let's hang out, hopefully. And sometimes they don't, and that's fine. You take shots, but like that, going off the ancestral trauma and, like, the energy type stuff, like the friend energy is a unique one. Like, just whatever it is, you just have the ability to tap into it, and you're like, I think we're gonna get along. I have no idea why, but it seems like this would work.
Yeah. Well, part of how we develop as human beings is we mirror, and we are mirrored by each other. And so I think we gravitate towards people who mirror us. And mirroring is like, I've read about this in, like, childhood development books, specifically, like, the work of Alice Miller, and a bit of James Hollis as well. Like, if a child is to grow up in a pretty healthy environment, it's important that they be mirrored by their parents. And which means like that a child, whether they're crying or whether they're happy or whether they're, frustrated or whether they're disgruntled, they feel like they're able to be met. They will still be met no matter how much they're showing up or no matter the full range of how they're showing up. They'll still be met by their parents. And that ability to meet your child actually creates in your child or conditions in your child the inner sense that they will be held, which actually is the springboard for them to then become independent.
Yeah.
And it's like a weird paradox thing. And I think that carries over when we're subconsciously attracted to certain people who we want to be our friends. Yeah. On some level, they're mirroring us and we're mirroring them, which is why we connect in that way.
Yeah. So like as a parent, then it would be important, like you said, to match your kids' energy, like not change who you are as a parent, but like be able to enter that zone.
Yeah.
Be able to be like, you're tuning a radio, that frequency, like you're able to tap into whatever vibe that your kid is putting out to make them, I guess that makes them feel more accepted or communication wise, like to just be able to occupy that space and also be your own parent. It seems like that would be the gist of it, like being able to be on that frequency.
Because the way we develop a separate sense of self, which is necessary, the way we develop a separate sense of self, we develop it around the age of 3, is we internalize other people's perceptions of us. And so that's why the mirroring piece is super important. Because if we instead internalize, if someone's like not really mirroring us, but like in the mirroring process, projecting all of their insecurities and all of their baggage, then we pick up on that. And that's what we end up internalizing, which is wild.
So if someone's self-projecting, like if I talk to a guy at a bar and he's, just for whatever reason, he's projecting insecurity where maybe he's talking shit to me or he's insulting me because he feels like he's getting mistreated in some other aspect of his life, I will then pick up on that frequency and in turn try to project that. Or I guess it depends how mature I am. But
right, if you don't know who you are, then like, you will like internalize whatever he's projecting. Yeah. As opposed to just being like, oh, this is his movie. And this is his universe in the multiverse. It's not my universe, but it's his universe. And he's like projecting that on, but it's not penetrable because I know what universe I'm operating from.
That's crazy. So if you don't know who you are, if you don't have a solid foundation of yourself, it's literally, it could be a form of mind control in a way where someone could just project on you and you're like, I guess this is me now, like I'm gonna project back. Whereas if you don't have you can if you know who you are and you have confidence in that, you can join them at their frequency but also still be authentic to yourself.
You can like meet them where they are but also exit.
So growing up the way that you did in the church environment, the perception of that others had of you, did you perceive others as being against you because you would assume assume that like they're the others, they're, I'm going to heaven, they're going to hell, like basically, they, and in turn like they probably think that about me, and or like how did you perceive the perception of others?
So I don't know that I perceived it as like they think that I'm going to hell. Maybe subconsciously I did, but I don't remember having that thought. But definitely like a superiority complex because I was constantly taught that this was the way, right? And this is the only way. And so the superiority complex, even from like an intellectual perspective, because, we fancied ourselves really smart because we could, for every Christmas on December 25th, we didn't sit around a tree opening up presents. We discussed the happenings of Emperor Constantine, and we were very much, and this is actually a beautiful thing that I was raised with a worldly education. Like I was learning about ancient Rome at 5 years old, like not even exaggerating. So, and of course, but with that comes this sort of intellectual superiority complex. It's like, we know things that other people don't know, and this sets us up on a pedestal, and you start to look down on people for sure. You start to subconsciously condescend to people, but you also start to be paranoid. At least I was paranoid to a certain extent. It induces a lot of fear of the other in a person to. If you really cling to the notion that only your way is the way, you have to be afraid of everyone else that doesn't adhere to your way, because they're a threat to the notion that your way is the right way.
Yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
You think that you're the best or you're superior, and then other people treat you like an asshole because maybe you are acting like an asshole, and then
or even
like,
worse, they're just ignoring. They're just
or they're just ignoring you, and you're like, it's because I'm superior. They can't operate my level of frequency. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm putting out an IQ frequency that's too high for these people.
Yeah.
But then that brings us full circle back to Theory
Beyonce.
of Enchantment.
No, I'm just
yes. Well, Beyonce, yes, who is part of Theory of Enchantment, right?
We certainly like shout out to her and a lot of her. We encourage people to study her music. And use it as a way to understand individual self-development within the Theory of Enchantment framework.
So when you were going through that phase of becoming more self-aware, breaking through the superiority, but also like relinquishing parts of your upbringing with the strictness and the religiosity, you said Theory of Enchantment, and throwing yourself into that full force was a way to sort of cope with what was going on, but then also that became your professional purpose.
Yeah.
Because you created one of the most unique jobs in the world for yourself. Like no one was hiring a Theory of Enchantment. You're just like, I'm going to make this thing that's going to fight racism, fight bigotry. Like you're literally like a racism avenger of like fighting. And it's really cool. So I want you. I'm super curious. Like, can you tell first like generally what it is, and then we'll get into more specifics. But like, what is Theory of Enchantment, and when you started going full force into it while you're working for the Wall Street Journal, can you talk about the path of how it became the thing that it is today?
Sure.
Like, what was sort of the fuel and the structure, the way that you were working on everything?
So yeah, for sure. Theory of Enchantment is my startup. It's an anti-racism startup. And the easiest way to think about it is like, it's a set of practices that people, whether you're an individual or whether you're an employee at an organization looking for like a DEI training, it's like a set of practices that you...
What's DEI?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, okay.
So it's a set of practices that you can adopt to help you get in right relationship with yourself, so you don't project your insecurities and your baggage onto other people, which is where racism comes from.
So racism is a form of that thing, like not knowing yourself.
Yeah, it's like you feel so deeply insecure about your self-worth that in order to compensate, you project this superiority complex based upon your skin color. To help you deal with like the chaos of the unknown, essentially. And so you can't deal with the chaos of the unknown. You don't know how to deal with it. So you reach for this easy heuristic where you say like, all the people who look like me are good and all the people who don't look like me are bad. And it's an overcompensation to deal with that sense of worthlessness and existential angst that you feel deep down at the pit of your stomach.
So I get, in a way, like racism is a very dark, just like tragic way of filling that hole of self-worth, and then you project that, and then you feel that you project that on other people.
Yeah,
and then if they don't know who they are, they're like, okay, like I guess this.
They will project it back.
Mine, that is crazy. Like that, the whole Theory of Enchantment grew directly out of your experience, like directly out of just like some of the things that you were reconciling with other things in your life? Like it grew. What did it look like at first when you were starting to write out it's more than a program. I feel like the program sounds sort of like Microsoft Excel-y, but like sure. the whole everything in the platform and the training, like what did that look like at first? Like were you just like things would pop into your head and you're like, okay, I'm gonna make this a slide, or like this, I'm gonna tie Beyonce to like this aspect of like, seriously, because I'm like, how it's very cool the way that you tie in the pop culture references to lessons to teach people how to love each other and how to interact. Like I'm curious how that web was working in your head, like how you were tying those different things together.
So early on, I had no idea that Theory of Enchantment, maybe I knew on a deep level, but I didn't really consciously know that Theory of Enchantment was a way in which I could work out my own shit. Originally, so my major in college was international studies.
Okay.
And my concentration was in conflict and diplomacy. And my topic of focus was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay.
And the reason why it was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was because of the affinity I had developed because of all of the Jewish holidays that I was keeping in my upbringing. And so the Theory of Enchantment at first was a response to that, and a response to my very strong allergy to anti-Semitism, more generally speaking. And so the central question was, how do we get people, why are people like, for the past 3,000 years hating on Jews, and like how do we get people to stop doing that and to start loving Jews?
Yeah,
that's like the first question. And then the second question was like, oh well, then how do we get people to learn how to love in general? Like, what is love? And then the third question was, well, what do people already love? Pop culture.
Yeah,
people already love pop culture. What are some of the biggest like thinkers, wielders of influence in pop culture? Beyonce, Disney, Apple. What do all these things have in common? Oh, if you study Beyonce, Disney, Apple, Nike, they all tell these stories of human beings like overcoming incredible odds in order to reach their full potential. So whether it's like the just do it idea in Nike, where it's like, if you wear this swoosh, then you can overcome any obstacle you encounter in sports, right? If it's like Beyonce saying, who run the world? Girls. And women seeing themselves reflected in the, if you see like every Disney movie is like some flawed, most of the best Disney movies are about some flawed individual who has to go through a series of obstacles and then come out on the other side heroic and knowing who they are and achieving their full potential. So this is like the gameplay loop, right? Because as I said to you earlier, I'm playing video games for the first time in my life. So I'm like just now learning this lingo. This is like the gameplay loop of all of these pop culture icons. And then I was like, well, what's that about? And so it was from that loop, and I don't remember exactly how it happened, but it was from that loop that I teased out the 3 principles of the Theory of Enchantment, which are: treat people like human beings, not like political abstractions. Criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy, and try to root everything you do in love and compassion. Okay, so these are the 3 principles that is going to create the scaffolding for the practices in the Theory of Enchantment. So like by the end of my time at the Wall Street Journal, I had written a thesis about this, and with the basic 3 principles, again, still applying it to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So it hadn't like reached, what's the word for when a rocket ship like leaves the atmosphere?
It's something, it's space launch, Muskian overload. But like you were working on the love loop and applying it to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and through that you got to Theory of Enchantment eventually. It's
like this universal. So I had landed on the word enchantment in that context because I was studying Apple, and I read a book by Guy Kawasaki, the former marketing director of Apple, called Enchantment. He talked about how Steve Jobs used this concept to design a lot of the Apple aesthetic. And it was a common term because it also overlapped with Disney, whose many films have this like enchanting, delightful feel. And Guy Kawasaki defined enchantment as the process by which a person opens up, or a product, or a person is like delighted by a product. But it was this thread and I remember when my parents bought like their first Mac and like opened it up, and it was just like this new, beautiful thing that delighted us and that made us really like, So I had landed on this word enchantment through my study of pop culture. So I wrote the paper at the Wall Street Journal, and then I worked for a nonprofit for 2 years where I was refining this idea. And the refinement process primarily looked like me lecturing at college campuses about how to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
So almost
using
like
the theory of enchantment.
So almost like the open mic version of creating your own platform.
Yeah.
You're working it out in real time, talking to students, getting their thoughts, their ideas, working on your own thoughts and ideas. And then that's really cool. Like that was part of your business idea writing process, was actually going and working it out in front of people.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that that's what I was doing at the time, but like that is what I was doing. It was like prototyping basically. And that is when, in the format of a 45 to 60 minute lecture, I would be like, treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. Well, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a human being? It's super complex. Let's study this Kendrick Lamar line about how complex it is to be a human. So that's when I would introduce the pop culture reference. Criticize to uplift and empower. What do we mean? Well, let's look at Maya Angelou and how she had conversations with Tupac and how she had to check him when he was acting crazy, but she checked him in a way that was like super empowering, and so on and so forth. And people responded to that. And so I did that for about 2 years. And after my contract was up, I was just like wondering what I should do with it. And some of the feedback that I got was like, you should make this into a full course. Like just tease out what you have now into a full course. So I spent the next maybe 4 or 5 months. This was like from December of 2018 on. I spent the next few months teasing out a curriculum. And then I tried to pitch it to high schools. And at that point, I was marketing it not obviously as a response to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but as a social-emotional learning.
That's too long of a title. My response to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Theory of Enchantment is much catchier.
Yeah, exactly. So I was marketing it as a social-emotional learning curriculum for high school students. And that's the other thing that started happening, because I didn't successfully at that time sell it as a curriculum, but high schools invited me to speak about it at assemblies, and that was really interesting because the kids responded. Which I don't know if I was expecting or not expecting, but I was definitely delightfully surprised and happily surprised that the kids responded. And the reason why they responded was because of the pop culture.
What was it about the response that you saw in the kids? Like, what were they doing? What were they saying that made you know that you were getting through to them in some way?
They were just like, kids are like scrolling on their phones, and then you mention Kendrick Lamar, and they're like, but now they're paying attention. It was as if they understood that I took them seriously. And I took what they were interested in seriously. And I was saying to them, the things that you're interested in, you're not just interested in them because you find them entertaining. You're interested in them because they're saying something very deep and profound about what it means to be human. So let's talk about that, and let's take that seriously. And they responded to that.
So you're asking yourself the questions like, what is love? Like, where does love come from?
What does it mean to be a human being?
What does it mean to be human? The easiest question on planet Earth. It's funny, like, how difficult those questions are that you're asking yourself. Like, it's like someone's asked me, what's the meaning of life? And I'm just like, fucking wake up and put on some socks. And and find some meaning. And like the fact that you were actually getting coherent and concrete answers and finding ways to test them out and present is really cool, because usually when you ask that, like on a podcast, if someone asks like, what do you think, like, what's the meaning of life? Usually it's just like, if I ask that question in my own head, I'm like, why did I just ask that? Like, if I was the guest, I'd be like, dude, fuck you.
Yeah.
Go fuck yourself, dude. Like the meaning of life. But the ridiculousness of the question keeps most people away from trying to test them out in any sort of real world capacity.
Yeah.
So the fact that you were,
and I by the way, I
that,
have to give credit to my parents, because my parents, like, for all of the dogma and the religious experience or religious tradition that I grew up with, there's also a lot of curiosity in that tradition. Like,
if the sun is in your eyes, by the way, I can close the shades.
Oh no, it's all good. I was like being inspired by the
yes, there you go.
by the ray of light.
Let the light come in.
Yeah, but like that tradition, yes, it had a lot of dogma, but it also had a lot of curiosity and wonder inherent in it. The audacity to question centuries of tradition that came before it is present, is a seed that's present in that. And in that audacity is a great deal of wonder and a great deal of enchantment, actually. So that the lineage and the legacy of that tradition is still present within me. I've just been able to discern what I want to keep and what I don't want to keep.
Yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, my favorite teachers, professors, they always tied what we were learning into pop culture. Mm-hmm. And some of them were so smooth at it that you didn't always realize, but maybe there would be some sort of current event or a song, a movie, and there's a comparison of a literary device to something that happened in Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah. And I'm just like, Wolf of Wall Street, like,
yeah, and then you're like,
what the like, it's cocaine, like, what is it? And then you're like paying attention. So I feel like there's it's such a good way to try to teach people something is to, you know, not just put down a hook and search endlessly and hope that someone bites it, but like, I feel like the pop culture almost acts like a bait in the way, like clickbait it works because you get people to pay attention, and a lot of it is empty because it ends up being something that was completely different from advertised and didn't fulfill the bait. But bait is good when the thing that you're putting down, people bite onto it, and then they're actually
like fed
they're getting and in case of the fish, it sucks. But like a sort of existential bait to get someone to, you know, they want to be reeled in, and then they get up to the boat and they're like, oh, there are actually some answers here. That's a really cool way to do it, to use the pop culture and leverage it and find people's interests and your own interests and use those together to fight and teach people. Yeah,
in this case, the bait and the fish are one. Because the pop culture I take it very seriously. The pop culture reveals to us what's going on in the collective consciousness of the human race. Like the fact that we've talked about Andrew Tate earlier, but the fact that Andrew Tate is super, super popular means something. And it, from my perspective, I feel like I was a cultural anthropologist in the previous life. But from my perspective, it tells me pay attention. There's something happening in the culture. There's deep yearnings in the culture. There's deep longings in the culture if someone is super, super popular. And then I have to go on a quest, or I have to question to figure out what it is. But it's not trivial, and it's not it can manifest in a superficial way, but if enough people are drawn towards it, there's something very deep and meaningful about why they're being drawn to it, and it really is important that we pay attention to it.
Yeah. So when we first learned how to split the atom, that was an amazing thing, and eventually that got turned into something that was capable of immense destruction. Do you worry that someone is going to take your theory and then make a theory of hate? Like if someone's like, that's really cool, let me figure out like exactly what is going on in the opposite way and give a concrete analysis of how to create the divide on social media, like the formula in a sense. Like, do you worry about that, like maybe transpiring in the future if someone takes it and runs with it and tries to cause destruction?
No, because that's already happening.
It's happening, but I feel like there's no course, or there's no classroom setting on how to make someone hate you or hate the world. You know what I mean? Like, you're teaching people and you're showing people a way that is working on how to love and how to...
I would disagree with that, actually. I would say there's plenty of courses out there. I mean, they're not marketed in that way, but I would say there's plenty of trainings in the world of anti-racism, for example, that are teaching people how to hate each other
in
based
anti-racism.
Oh, for sure.
What are some of the courses that you see where you go, like, this is actually doing the opposite, or this is just like not it? What are some of the things that you see in the anti-racist sphere that
like
can do that?
Any course that's like, or any training that's like telling you to basically making quote unquote whiteness the amulet of destruction. Like any course that says that like the problem is whiteness and you need to and it defines whiteness as like everything from I don't know, love of the written word. This is real. I'm not making this up. Love of the written word, or showing up on time, or I don't know, like other perfectionism, as if people of all backgrounds aren't prone to perfectionism, right? So any training that like sets up this dichotomy or this easy heuristic that says all the things we do not like, we are putting into a category called whiteness, and you should dismantle it, hate it, reject it, try to defeat it. Any course that does that is perpetuating racism.
So it's like they're trying to, or like you have the idea of being anti-racist, but you're actually amplifying stereotypes that you're like boxing people in an effort to teach them to act one way, but it's actually causing them to act another way. Like if you teach them the stereotypes of whiteness, then you're also putting stereotypes in their head where you're like, okay, if that's not white, then it has to be blackness or Hispanic or whatever. Like, you're by proxy planting these seeds of or frequencies, whatever you want to call it, of like, this relates to this skin color, this relates to this is this, and like you start to put it in categories.
It's just like easy heuristics to deal with existential feeling of angst, and it's very sinister, because if you don't know anything about, let's say, the history of the civil rights movement and what people in the civil rights movement were really trying to do, and how they like really tried to make sure that they themselves were integrated spiritually before going out to protest racism, like if you don't understand the willpower that went into this idea that we're going to be sure to guard ourselves against resentment and the politics of resentment as we go out and protest, because we understand that if we fall prey to the spirit of resentment, we will end up adopting the very same belief systems that we're protesting. And the failure to really, I mean, this is also part of the failure of the American school system, which doesn't generally teach this. I got a crazy educational experience going to like elementary school. I went to some of the best. New Orleans it's interesting. New Orleans is known for being a innovator of education.
Really?
Yeah, like they have public schools, private schools, charter schools. If you want to have options for, exposing your child to different educational approaches, New Orleans is definitely a place I would suggest, because I went to Langston Hughes Elementary School from kindergarten to third grade, and it was there that I got like the Black oral poetic tradition and like an understanding of like the American fight for civil liberties within the context or within the perspective of the Black freedom struggle. That's where I learned all the poetry of Maya Angelou, and the namesake was Langston Hughes, and so that's where I got like the oral poetic spoken word tradition. And then I went to Hines, which was a more international school, and I was exposed to people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life. And then I went to high school or middle school. This was after Katrina. I went to middle school at McDonald 35, which is very much a school that has a sports and band program similar to what was depicted in Beyonce's Coachella performance, right? Yeah. So I sort of moved from like predominantly Black schools, which tend to, in my experience, at least in the South, emphasize the poetic musical tradition. And I would go from those schools to more internationally diverse schools where I would be exposed to people of all backgrounds, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic. So that move has also deeply shaped my worldview and my perspective. I forgot why I was talking about this though. We kind of got carried away in the description.
You mentioned that New Orleans has a really good variety of different types of education, and we were talking about Beyonce. No, we were just like in terms of teaching people and the stereotypes associated with some anti-racist.
Oh, just
teachings.
Like not knowing or not being steeped enough deeply in American history.
Yeah,
which comes from not having a deep educational upbringing, which I got both from my parents and from the schools that I attended in New Orleans.
So I'm curious because you mentioned stereotypes, and there are a lot of stereotypes that are perpetuated by pop culture, white, Black, Hispanic, brown, like whatever it is. But pop culture is also a big portion of what Theory of Enchantment is. So are stereotypes inherently negative, or is it the way that stereotypes are portrayed and used that make them bad?
Stereotypes are neutral as long as the person deploying the stereotypes or receiving the stereotype is conscious that they're stereotyping.
So if they're aware and they know it's a stereotype, like if you're a stand-up comedian and you're making a joke about a stereotype, like if you're doing crowd work and there's a 300-pound Black guy and you're like, what NFL team do you play for? This is like a joke or something. Like there are hilarious moments in comedy. And actually, like, there could probably be a whole just like analysis of this, but I'm a huge fan of stand-up. And now that I'm thinking about it, when you do crowd work, the only thing you have to go by is the way that someone looks. So if you're going to make a joke about them, you have to make a joke about their appearance. And if you're going to make a joke about their appearance, chances are it fits into a certain stereotype, because you wouldn't look at a person in the crowd and then think of a joke if it didn't like fit into some category. So like that's interesting, like the way that stereotypes work in comedy and can actually be leveraged into something positive, like making someone laugh, like the surprise of asking someone what they do. And sometimes it fits into the stereotype and it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's the complete opposite, and that's also hilarious. Yeah. So yeah, it makes sense that it would be, stereotypes are, it's like how you use it. It's not inherently good or bad. And if you're aware, like if you know you're making a joke, or if you know you're generalizing, then it's not something that's negative.
Right. And that goes back to like the first principle. When you are conscious that you're stereotyping, or you're consciously receiving or accepting a stereotype, what that means in my mind is like, that description doesn't actually capture the complexity of what it means to be you. Like that is what I mean by conscious. And like from the comedian's perspective, I'm sure that, in order for a comedian to be flexible enough to play on stereotypes or play with stereotypes, they have to understand that like it's only true within a very limited sense. Otherwise, they would not have a full range to work with. So that's what I mean by being conscious, like understanding that like the thing that you're using to label this person or the description that I'm using to label myself doesn't actually fully capture the full complexity of who I am. And in fact, if I'm, let's say, accusing another person of laziness, I'm also simultaneously aware that in some contexts, I'm also lazy.
Yeah. So it's there's a shared thing going on between you and the other person. You may have similar characteristics, and some people get perceived as having more of a certain characteristic because they're associated with a certain stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people that are not aware of the fact that they're stereotyping. So it just becomes like this sort of death circle of like self-fulfilling, where you're just like calling stereotypes and then another person responds, and you're never actually becoming more aware that the color of your skin has nothing to actually do with the characteristic of your personality or the whatever it is, like finances, friends, like things like that. So stereotypes are interesting. Like I grew up in a town, I said that was probably like 75% Jewish,
mm-hmm.
and I have Jewish people in my family. And so I never really had stereotypes of Jews in my head because I saw so many different examples of Jewish people.
Right.
And so like later in life, whether I'm in college or just like I'll see something on TV and it's like the stereotypical Jew. I'm like, yeah, that person looks Jewish, but then like, so is she, him, him. It's like, cause you can, there's no solid archetype in my head of a Jew because I knew so many of them
Jews.
growing up. But like, if you take Hispanic or Black, like there was maybe like 2 Black guys in my grade.
Mm-hmm.
There was like 4 Hispanic people. It was like 70% Jewish, 25% South Korean. Like it was an interesting mix.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on TV, and I'm like, oh, there's like the nerdy Black guy. There's like the cool Black guy, and that created a stereotype in my head that got dissolved once I started playing sports. And you're just like meeting a bunch of different people from all different backgrounds, like playing baseball with Black guys, Dominicans, Hispanic, and becoming friends with all different types of people. You quickly learn that the stereotype is just a thing. I feel like you have to have space in your life for a stereotype to be created with a lack of interaction. And because I had lacks of interactions with certain types of people for the first like 10 to 12 years of my life, that allowed a stereotype to infiltrate the space in my head. And then if you're meeting new people and you're branching out through different activities, that gives it a chance to dissolve. And I'm sure I still have stereotypes in my head of different groups of people, but like it feels like meeting new people and befriending them and learning about the way that someone is as a human being is almost like the anti-stereotype. It sort of washes it away. Yeah.
So now imagine an anti-racism training that tells you actually what you need to do in order to defeat racism is to self-segregate and not expose yourself to people of all different backgrounds.
And that's what a lot of anti-racist trainings do.
Yeah.
They're just like, we're going to teach you to be anti-racist today, by the way. Like, don't hang out with anyone who doesn't do what you do or look like you. Yeah. That is hilarious.
Yeah.
So we mentioned Tate before. I want to ask you about Andrew Tate, but I'm just going to go to the bathroom real quick and I'll be right back.
Okay.
So you made a great informative video on Andrew Tate on your YouTube channel, and I actually wanted to read a quote from that video.
Sure.
So you said Andrew Tate is like a villain whose pain from childhood has not been healed, but has been corrupted into a deep hunger for power, which sounds like Thanos.
Classic.
So like how how do you how and we were talking about this a little bit before the episode too, but like how have you viewed Tate's rise? I'm calling him Tate, like we're about to have a phone conversation. Like what's up what's up, dude? We're talking about you. How do you view Tate's rise to dominance in the not only in the manosphere but also just complete social media saturation? How have you viewed that, and what are your thoughts on at least what he's sharing online, his whole rise to dominance?
So I first want to start by saying that, I was introduced to the Andrew Tate phenomenon through a friend who's not like super into him, but into him. And it sort of came out of left field. I didn't expect it. I had heard about Andrew Tate in passing, but I didn't actually engage with any of his content until this friend told me about him. And, whenever someone, especially personal in my life, is drawn to someone or something that is controversial, I try to pay attention. And that, combined with the fact that Andrew Tate is super popular, also compels me to pay attention. I also really believe in man. And I think it's important to say that at this juncture in the human experience. I think that like we live in a culture that certainly has denigrated men how long is a while? I don't know, but for
a few weeks.
Yeah.
No.
for some time. And I didn't necessarily, I wasn't really like exposed to that because that's just not the circles that I run in. I don't generally hang around people who are mean to men or women, like as a group. But the rise of Andrew Tate made me realize that like there are deep wounds, I think, that a lot of men have. And certainly, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Richard Reeves, who's written a lot. So Richard Reeves is, I don't know is he a sociologist or one of those ologists who studies things, but he's shown how like men are really struggling in terms of like level of education and experiences of depression and prone to suicidal attempts, far more successful than women at committing suicide. And all these things are like very much pervasive among men of a certain age who are struggling with that existential sense of self-worth. And I think Andrew Tate has a response. And his response is, in my humble opinion, not the most compelling response or not the most sustainable response from a healthy perspective, but it is nonetheless a compelling one. So I understand Andrew Tate, or the rise of Andrew Tate, within that frame. I also understand the rise of Andrew Tate, as you asked about social media and like the apparatus of social media, the way that the algorithms work. The purpose of a social media company is to get you to pay attention as long as possible. Yeah. And one of the things that enables or compels us to pay attention as human beings is outrage and is anger and is, bravado. And we pay attention to that. We're wired as human beings to pay attention to that. And so you take someone like Andrew Tate, who definitely has, as far as I can tell, definitely has parental baggage, definitely has some ancestral trauma going on there. Yeah. And you combine it with his machismo and bravado and anger at women and outrage at women, and you have the phenomenon of Andrew Tate.
Can you tell the story of the lights incident with his dad? Because you mentioned it in the video, but I feel like that's like sort of a good stroke to paint part of what Tate is portraying today.
Yeah, so Andrew Tate tells the story about how when he was 5 years old, he was at his friend's house, and his friend told his mom that he was afraid of the dark, and so he asks his mom for a nightlight, and Andrew Tate goes, "What's that?" And his friend says, "It's a nightlight. I get it every time I'm afraid of the dark." And Andrew, as a 5-year-old, says, "Oh, that's interesting."
I think he had the same voice when he was, "What's that? What's that, Dad?"
Yeah, exactly.
"Bring me my meal and bring the light."
Exactly. Same voice. And then so the next day, Andrew asks his father for a nightlight. And his father's playing chess. His father was a chess master, or very good at chess, rather, I should say. And his father's sort of ignoring him. And he keeps pestering his father. And he says, "I'm afraid of the dark." And so his father's brilliant response to this 5-year-old child who's afraid of the dark is to lock him up in a room, and a completely dark room, and tell him, "Oh, you're afraid of the dark? I'm sure you'll figure it out by being afraid of the dark for the next, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours." And so,
just very logical parenting.
Yeah. So Andrew Tate's father essentially throws him into solitary confinement and tells him, "Figure it out." And as Tate tells the story, he cries the whole time. He's afraid. He's terrified. But then he comes out and he's not afraid of the dark. Now, from a psychological perspective, a 5-year-old, like the way that our brains are at 5 years old, we only have certain coping mechanisms that are automatically wired in us to deal with situations like that. And one of those coping mechanisms that we have is disassociation. And so we can, our capacity to rationalize in retrospect is incredibly impressive. But the way that a 5-year-old who looks up to his father as this superhero, right? The way that a 5-year-old processes that, and can only process that, is through a coping mechanism of numbing. And so, Andrew Tate tells the story about, in a way that sort of like celebrates his father and really glorifies his father. But it's very clear to me when listening to Andrew Tate, it's clear that he is constantly seeking out his father's love. He's trying to prove his father's love, and his father was not present in his life around from 13 years old on, which is when he moved with his mother to England. And so there's this constant like longing for the father's approval that is ever present it's like the underbelly of what Andrew Tate is.
It makes sense because he says, "I'm your daddy" a lot. So
right,
it's like
that's weird, guys.
He's
weird.
And by a lot, I mean I think I've seen like 2 clips of him like talking shit to a guy, being like, "I'm your father" or something like that. But
not a coincidence.
Yeah, no, like it's interesting. Like I had a different introduction to Tate. It was actually through the world of stand-up comedy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because one of my favorite podcasts is called Your Mom's House.
Okay.
Which is funny because it's like we were just talking about daddy, and the fans of this podcast are called the mommies, like Your Mom's House.
Nice.
And it's two comedians, husband and wife, Tom Segura and Christina P. And they had Andrew Tate on their podcast.
No way. What was that like?
So this was before I knew who Tate was, or I knew who he was in a very general way. I had seen maybe one clip of him and kind of went in and out of my mind. And I knew that he was just like some guy in the manosphere, like pickup artist type of like, but I didn't know how big he had become at that point and how much bigger he would become. And so he's on the podcast, and he's very funny when he's engaged with comedians. And the reason why it was so funny, my first impression of him was like this guy's on YouTube, makes videos, and he's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Because the hosts of Your Mom's House were like, they were aware that he is a character, or he's playing some sort of character, whether or not Tate is aware of it himself, and how deeply tied into his trauma it is. Like they were having fun with the character of Andrew Tate. And so Tate was like, telling Christina, like, you know, this, like, you have to I keep my bitches in line. And then Christina P is like, how, as a bitch, like, how do I stay in line? And Tom's like, yeah, how do I keep my bitch in line? Like, it's his wife.
Yeah.
And they're just like having fun with it. They're both hilarious. And so it wasn't like the other super serious conversations that I would go on to see him have with Piers Morgan and, you know, every other.
You're like, oh, you're serious.
Yeah, exactly. So like they were dancing on the superficiality of Tate's character,
yeah,
and making it so funny. And so I was like, oh, this guy jokes around, like doesn't really mean anything, and you know, he must be doing impressions of this on TikTok or whatever. Like he's clearly just like being an asshole for the character's sakes, for fun. And then he goes on to do, you know, more serious style interviews and talking to guys like Piers Morgan, and it's very challenging. There's a lot of tension. It's very Tate's on the defense, which he never really was in the Your Mom's House podcast, because like whatever they say, they just double down on it and be like, maybe you should lock your wife in a cage, like and like all this stuff. So it's just interesting for my own perspective to be molded by seeing it through a comedic lens of Andrew Tate for the first time, and then slowly realize that I do believe that there is an element of what he's doing to just entertain himself. And he knows that he knows he has a sense of humor, and there are aspects of his personality that he's clearly playing into, but he was much more serious about what he was saying than I realized when I saw him on Your Mom's House. I thought I was like, maybe he believes like 4% of this, and then you go on to find out that it's probably closer to like 94% of what he's saying he actually believes. So yeah, that was my introduction to him. And then watching him completely take over social media like a whirlwind, to take over YouTube, take like anything that had videos, he was just popping up in my feed constantly.
Yeah.
And yeah, it made sense to me that a lot of younger men would gravitate towards that, because he fulfilled a lot of the concerns that I had when I was, you know, 14, 15, 16, like even up to my early 20s, where I valued myself as, you know, how many girls can I hook up with this month? I want to get a job in finance, you know, work in banking, make like $200K a year, like work 90 hours a week, like whatever it takes. I'll just like do that. I want to drive the
Maserati.
Yeah, you want to have nice things. You want to like, part of being a man is showing off, and those things are very fun. Not that I have them, but like I've rented. I went down to Miami and I rented a couple supercars, and I'm like driving around a Porsche, and I'm just like, I know, like this is why. Like when you press the pedal, and like your soul vibrates, and I'm like, oh my god, like I want to fucking drive this every day of my life. And it's like, I do think some of those things are important, but I didn't realize how serious he was about the value system that he was joking around with on Your Mom's House compared to what he would go on to become.
I do wonder, going back to that whole mirroring thing, like how we become who we are depending upon or based upon the people around us who are mirroring us and who we're mirroring. I wonder if he at first didn't take himself that seriously, but then when he saw that so many other people were taking him seriously, he started to reflect that and take himself even more seriously. Perhaps that like passes the buck a bit, but I do wonder, like, you know, the impact of celebrity in general can be a curse, can be an incredibly profound curse for people who achieve that level of fame. And it's like, oh, they want me to show up in this way. They're rewarding me with likes and retweets and shares for showing up in this way.
Yeah.
And oh, what's that? My external sense of self, this is the subconscious part, but my external sense of self is in fact looking to be validated.
Yeah.
That can create a wild loop that not only is harmful for the, you know, the naive people who take what Andrew Tate says as gospel, but also for Andrew Tate himself. Like, I see some of his tweets. I was following him for like a month because I was just fascinated. And I was like, see, I was reading some of his tweets. He's told the story about his father came over to England, and his mother had just gotten him a haircut or something, and the haircut didn't turn out right, and she was like, in his words, fussing over her hair. And then his father comes over, and his father is like triggered by the fact that his mom is fussing over his hair. So his father takes him to a barbershop and basically tells the barbershop to cut his hair off. And he's like, guys don't care about their hair. And in the comments, it's so funny because
he's had the same haircut for years. From 5 years old, he's just been bald.
Yeah. And he's like, you look at some of the comments. Some of the comments are like, guys definitely care about their hair. Yeah. Like, it's not just like exclusively a female thing to care about your hair. Like, in the hip hop community, looks are a thing. Like, it's an aesthetic that is like important to maintain. And it's like, one of the things I tried to point out is like, isn't it interesting that the conclusion that you came to was that like women fuss about these aesthetics, but the person that really fussed about it was your father. Like, the person that was really like energetically activated and like started yelling about it was your father. It's like, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, like your mom was talking to you about it, and your dad took a blade to your head and made you shave off your identity as a man, your hair.
It's just like there's like very clearly deep wounds to me that are visible whenever I read almost anything that he writes. And as much as I like, sure, I get a thrill from, psychoanalyzing from my armchair, like what I think is showing up in his life in terms of like his father's legacy and his grandfather's legacy and stuff like that. But I also care about Andrew Tate, and I think that people should care about Andrew Tate and not just shit on him when they critique him, which is going back to the second principle of the theory of enchantment, right? Criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy.
Yeah. He's fascinating because usually the guys who are in the manosphere space where they're just like, this is how you be a man, this is how you talk, this is how you pick up women, this is how you make money, like they aren't super relatable. Like, they don't really have a sense of humor. Anyone who's self-aware will just see right through it, and they don't take jokes easily. They can't poke fun.
They're very sensitive.
Yeah, very sensitive, and like everyone has certain sensitivities. Like, I have. I think stand-up comedy helps me process my sensitivities better because if I hear a joke I don't like and I'm offended, I'm like, wait, what just made me offended? And then I think about it, and then that kind of clears out. And I love that. And Tate has that too. Like, he's a human being, but he seems to have more of a sense of getting through to people and sitting in the pocket conversationally. And like, if someone talks shit to him, he talks shit right back. And so he has the relatability and sense of humor aspect. And also, he was a professional fighter. He was a world champion kickboxer. And so a lot of the guys talk a big game in the manosphere community. But when it comes down to it, if someone throws a punch, they just crumple up or get in their car, and they wouldn't actually be able to defend themselves. And Tate has the confidence of knowing that 99.9% of people on the planet, if he's talking shit, chances are he's going to be able to get out of it. So there's no sort of cowering to a level of, okay, let me meet this person here, because if I offend them too much, like maybe they'll swing at me, or like just that innate fear of getting your ass kicked. If you're a professional fighter, I imagine you don't walk through the world with nearly that same level of fear as the average person. Maybe
which is why I really want to see Andrew Tate have a conversation with Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Like, I would pay good money to see that, or to just like be there in the room.
Yeah, to see Mike Tyson talk about some of the ways that he's went through transformations.
Yeah,
it kind of seems like Andrew Tate is a version of a younger Mike Tyson, where he has all the ego, he knows people can kick his ass, he has the money, the world's eyes are upon him, and then you start to, I don't know exactly what Mike Tyson's regimen was for becoming more self-aware. I know he smoked the toad a lot. He talks about that on podcasts.
Yeah.
He spends a lot of time with animals, but like to be able to see Mike Tyson talk to Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate knows that, yeah, this guy might be 30 years older than me, but he will beat the fuck out of me. Like, we'll beat the fuck out of each other.
Yeah.
At the very least. And there's a chance he will beat the fuck out of me. Like, looking into Mike Tyson's eyes, he's one of the few people on the planet that would be able to strike fear into Andrew Tate if he misspoke or if he offended Mike Tyson, or at least, like, even if nothing happened, like, at least Tate would experience what other people might experience when they talk to him, or they feel threatened or they feel offended. So that would be a really interesting conversation to see Mike Tyson and Andrew Tate. I hope that happens.
I hope that happens soon.
The Hot Boxing podcast with Mike Tyson is incredible, and he has all different people on. So I could see him having a fighter on there, for sure. So I was trying to think of Devil's Advocate.
My favorite advocate.
For Tate, yes. Much better than the Angel.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of something that I could relate to play Devil's Advocate for Tate that would be a positive to what he's doing. And this is what I came up with. So,
okay.
Devil's Advocate to Andrew Tate. And I'll explain this. The flash of money, cars, and girls is not the final destination, but it provides the energy for a boy to become interested in starting the path to become a man. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. Okay. So,
I mean, I buy that already, but
you do?
Yeah.
All right, we're done. No, I'm just no, but so do you know about the book The Game by Neil Strauss?
I've heard of it, yeah.
So it's this book that teaches you how to embody the skills of being a pickup artist. And I read this my freshman year in college, took notes on it, like the whole thing. I was like, I want to feel what it's like to have my choice of women, be able to like feel more confident, go into the bar, to close, to like do all these things. And then I heard about the book The Game, which is basically the manual how to do that. And there's a lot of power dynamic manipulation in the game. There's this thing called negs, where you give someone a backhanded compliment. For example, if I was in a bar and I was talking to you, I might say something like, your hair smells like smoke. And you're like, maybe you're just like, oh, like, okay. But in your head, you're thinking, damn, like, do I smell bad? Like, does he like smoke smell? Like weed smoke, cigarette smoke? Or another one in the book was like, oh, I love your nails. My grandma has the same color. So it's like, I like your nails. Also, you have the same selection as a 96-year-old woman. So it's like, what is he? And it's like all these subtle. So
you sow confusion.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, you're sowing confusion and you're sowing insecurities in hopes that the girl will try to get back in your good graces by wanting to be around you. And if the girl is self-aware, and if she does not have low self-esteem or a lot of insecurities, then it will not work. Because then she'll just be like, which I didn't realize at the time. I was like, the game system filters out anyone I would want to be with, because the girl that I want to be with would not even respond. Like, as soon as I open my mouth, she'd just be like, bye. Like, you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
But the game gave me this motivation, this energy to, for lack of a better phrase, put in the reps of approaching people and approaching women and talking to them and getting more comfortable with a skill that I would eventually use in a much more positive way. Like, so being comfortable talking to the opposite sex, social interaction, leading to fulfilling relationships, and not just like these short-term stuff could be fulfilling too, but just like something that's more of a long-term commitment. And I slowly started to realize, and I was like, this, like, it kind of feels empty. Like, I was never full force into the game. Like, I read it and I was using some of the things in the book, but eventually I started to see through a lot of it, and I was just like, I think this is not the best. I think this is not the direction.
Was there like a moment, or was it just gradual over time?
There were a few moments where I was either talking to a girl or thinking about a girl that I want to hook up with, and I was like, okay, I have to, say this. I can't be too eager. I got to wait this long to text her. And I'm thinking to myself, why do I need her approval so badly? Like the whole, I'm saying things that are sort of activating in an attempt to activate insecurities in someone else in a way that is showcasing my own insecurities of needing the approval of someone else. Because everything, I'm trying to make this person have a certain opinion of me in order that they will spend time with me or sleep with me or whatever. And so I'm like, this seems something that a strong person wouldn't do. Yeah. But I'm so like, I'm having conversations with people, downtown Richmond where I went to school, and I'm like, this isn't even fun because I'm so worried about this sort of tactical formulaic, like, I don't want to misspeak here.
Is it almost like paranoid? You become paranoid a little, or you're like you're like surveilling.
Yeah, it's like you're watching yourself have a conversation, which is...
You're not like present in the conversation.
Exactly, because I'm always thinking of the next step.
Right,
I'm always thinking of the end goal. And I started to have these thoughts, and I was like, well, I mean, there has to be another option. There has to be something else out there that's gonna make like it. I want to have a good time. I'm 19, 20 years old. I want to have sex. I want to have a good time. But there has to be a good way to do this that is leaving both people feeling fulfilled and feeling like that was a good time, not just one person using the other. And so while I'm having these thoughts, I came across another book by Mark Manson called Models. And it was basically laying out a lot of the things that I was thinking in my own head, but just in very clear, concise verbiage where he's talking about being a man is not needing the approval of someone else. And that's also, you don't want to not give a shit about other people. Right. That's not the answer, but like you want to act you want to be bold, and you want to be confident in who you are. And as a byproduct of that, you are filtering out the people who will want to spend time with you and will not want to spend time with you. So don't try to say all these things in an effort to get someone else to like you. Say what's on your mind, say it confidently, say it boldly.
Yeah.
And that is your filtering system for life, for attracting the people who will eventually be in your life or not be in your life. So you're actually like making the whole dating process easier, and you can use that with dating, business. And I'm reading this, I'm like, all right, like this is
the book's like, just be yourself.
Yeah. And I'm like, it can't be this easy, but whatever. And so there was no like light switch moment, but I just gradually started to shift my focus into, I'm just going to be myself strongly and do it earlier than later in the conversation. And it was so much more relaxing, so much more fun, because even the conversations that wouldn't lead anywhere, I was like, well, I mean, at least I was myself. At least I was saying, I didn't waste 3 hours or 3 weeks talking to this person that would eventually found out that this is my opinion on X and this is their opinion on X, and therefore this is just not gonna this is not gonna work out. So like that whole system and way of thinking and way of approaching it eventually became a part of the way that I was walking through the world, but I wouldn't have gotten there without the game. So in a way, Andrew Tate, I feel like, can be the game to young men like 15, 16, 17 years old, where they're like, money, cars, women, like, how do I get this? And then Andrew Tate comes on their screen and tells them exactly how to get it, exactly what to do. And like, they're trying to do it. And you're acting like a 17-year-old, you're acting like a 20-year-old. And you slowly realize that even though this gave me the boost to start thinking about how do I get some of these things, it's not the way that is the healthiest. It's not the way that's the most fun. It's not the most fulfilling. But unfortunately, a lot of people are not lucky enough, or, you know, maybe they don't have the self-awareness to realize that that's not the way over time. So I suspect that there's a lot of people, it's like giving yourself poison in hopes that your immune system's gonna beat it, and you'll get better
like
on
in
the
that
other
movie.
side. Yeah. Which movie?
Princess Bride.
Princess Bride.
Yeah.
She gives herself poison and
no,
because she doesn't want to get married.
No, the main character who goes, "You killed my name is." I'm gonna botch this. This is really embarrassing. But the main character is like this guy who looks like Zorro, and he goes after this guy who kills his father, and he says, "Prepare to die." But it's a great movie. You should watch it. But one of the things he does is he gradually gives himself poison so that his immune system becomes immune to it. Essentially.
Yeah. So that was like the game to me, and like Andrew Tate for a lot of boys around the world is like, it's a poison that maybe 20% of them, I don't know, I'm just throwing out a number, 20% will grow out of, and maybe 80% will stick with that, like huge. Become poison. That's it's like huge. Yeah, it's not worth it at all. But in my head, I'm like, what is the positive? I do think also, like, a lot of the things he talks about with fighting are true, like the importance of competition. Yeah. The athletic mindset. There are a lot of things that he talks about where I think about my baseball days. I'm like, a lot of things in life are win and lose, but you have to know when you're going to put on that hat of competition and when you're going to take it off. So I do think that's useful. But yeah, that's just my long convoluted way of saying that Andrew Tate is not the absolute worst.
I think that, listen, if I were to pinpoint my religious orientation, my spiritual orientation, what it's like today, I'm super Taoist. Like, I believe in Taoism. I think that the Tao Te Ching was like one of the best philosophical books written. And like in Taoism, it's like there's no shadow without light. There's no day without night, which happens also to be true. So I do think that, I was a huge fan of Star Wars growing up, and I understand the Jedi and the Sith, and they balance each other out. And like, there's something profoundly true about that. And I do think that there's elements of truth in what Andrew Tate says, for sure. And that, without the darkness of some of what Andrew Tate says, you wouldn't have the light of what he says. And I do think it's very possible for young men to fall into a Tate like channel and fall back out. It's a toss-up, nothing is inevitable. We have no idea how it's going to shake out. And I think ultimately Andrew Tate is simply a symptom of a meaning crisis that men in particular, I think all of us are facing a meaning crisis at this juncture in our species, moment. But I think that the way that men are experiencing it manifests in the Andrew Tate phenomenon. And I'm much more interested in asking how might we solve that than simply, shitting on Andrew Tate.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if he will go through an experience or come across something, a book, movie, whatever, that will spark some sort of transformation in him and Andrew Tate.
He might have to go to jail in order to. But seriously,
he'll fit in well there. He's got the tattoos and the bald head and the muscles. He'll come out even stronger with his Tateisms. But who knows? Prison it seems to be a spark for a lot of people.
Yeah, like he might have to go to jail. Yeah. He has to be humbled, and by humbled I mean the deep etymological root of the word humility, which is to know that you're of the earth and you will return to the earth at some point. He does not walk around carrying that sensibility or sensitivity, and he might have to experience. It might take experiencing prison in order for him to realize that, and and then to awaken to the other side of where he is spiritually right now.
So we already addressed one impossible question, which is what is love? How do you get people to love each other? And you've managed to provide part of the answer with what we've talked about on this podcast. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you another impossible question that I can't answer myself, which is how do we fix the masculinity crisis?
Oh my God.
And a double-edged question, how do we fix it? And what is the source of it?
Oh my God.
You have 30 seconds.
So there's this All right. There's this beautiful book by James Hollis called Under Saturn's Shadow. And then the subtitle is The Wounding and the Healing of Men. And that book contains the answer to your question.
The Wounding and the Healing of Men.
Yeah.
All right. That was under 30 seconds.
Boom. Defer to the experts.
Yes. There you go.
I can talk a little bit about it if you want, but it's a beautiful book that really truly answers that question.
You have 2 more seconds to talk about
it.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I guess just a brief overview of as we end off, what is it in that book that stood out to you as this contains the answer? This is the way to go. So
historically speaking, he argues that historically speaking, indigenous cultures, men would have to go through these rites of passage. The bar mitzvah is actually a relatively contemporary version of a rite of passage that a man had to go through in order to transition from adolescence to adulthood. And in a rite of passage, inevitably there's wounding. There's wounding that happens. You have to, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of all the Viking shows that are on Netflix these days. And so
I just watched The Northman.
Okay.
Too.
Okay, nice. I haven't seen that one, but I've seen literally all the other ones.
I need to check out the other ones.
Yeah.
The Northman was really good. But so yeah, rites of passage, Vikings, the whole folklore.
Yeah, the folklore, you see this in the Viking series where this young guy who's basically the prince of the king, he has to go off on his own in the tundra and survive on his own for the next 7 days. And once he's survived and proven himself to be a man, he comes back into the community and he's considered to be a part of the community. So historically speaking, this happened in indigenous cultures all around the world. You would have, a man would have the elders, the men who were the elders of that community, the tribal elders of that community, and they would
That's one of the wolves right now. Yeah, I'm gonna my rite of passage. My rite of passage after this podcast. I'm gonna go fight a pack of wolves outside my apartment.
There you go. Exactly. So the elders, the male elders would go with the young men and guide them into this rite of passage, and they would literally have to leave the community, which is a wounding. It's a severing from the community. They'd have to go out and do some harrowing thing that was life-threatening often, and the only examples of rites of passage that we have now is sports, the military, or prison for men. And in the absence of that, what happens when, according to this author, what happens when a man experiences this severing is a wound that has no way to transform itself. So in ancient times, if you will, in tribal cultures, a man was wounded by going through the rite of passage, and then he was brought back into the community. So the wounding served a purpose, right? The wounding had meaning. But in modernity, there aren't those same sort of containers in the way that a tribal community contained that experience for the men in the village. And so in the absence of that, you have excess, right? You have this desire on the part of men to go out and prove themselves and to go out and make a man of themselves, but it's sort of out of place. It's misplaced. And that's why you brought up Wolf of Wall Street actually earlier. Wolf of Wall Street, this is such an interesting phenomenon to me because the first time I saw this film, I was oh, it's about these guys who are greedy and super, greedy or whatever. And then the second time I watched it, it's oh no, these guys are addicts. They're addicted to the pursuit of money, wealth, and power and women, and they're pursuing it to fulfill this deep void that they feel inside. And so the question becomes how do we create containers so that men, especially young men, can be can have like older men to guide them, right? And I think that the Andrew Tate phenomenon is he's followed by younger men for a reason, right? Can have older elders to guide them, like Mike Tyson, to guide to guide them, to
guide their fist into the face when they step out of line.
To like experience wounding, because wounding is a part of life, but to experience wounding that is then transformative. So like you go through a transformative process and there's a purpose behind the wounding. If there's no purpose behind the wounding, then it becomes a scarring essentially. And it's given to excess, and then you reach for coping mechanisms like drugs and alcohol and sex with everyone, because you're trying to fill this void that historically had been filled by the community that you were a part of.
So with someone like Andrew Tate, he's gone through the rite of passage athletically with practicing kickboxing, becoming a world champion.
Yes.
But
he has no tribal father.
He has no tribal father.
And that's a huge wound for him. That's a huge wound.
And the container, like his athletic, I don't want to say athletic mindset, but just like the Tate-isms, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Because it's not contained into kickboxing or one area of his life, it's leaking out into this is how you approach life. No one remember, his parents divorced when he was like I think 13 or 12 years old. Okay.
And that's when he moved to, that's why he has the accent, because he moved to England with his mom, and he felt this incredible sense of separation because obviously he looks up to his father, all these things. He never experienced coming back home. Now, this actually will connect back to Beyonce.
I was like, Beyonce popped into my head. I was like, how do we bring this full circle? But go ahead.
So Beyonce's Black is King, which I mentioned earlier, is probably, I think it's the best thing she's ever done. Black is King is a retelling of the story of the Lion King, but through the experience of the Black community. And it takes place in Africa, and she's basically like, she depicts this young kid who's Simba, but it's like people, it's like human beings. She depicts this young kid who's Simba, who his father is killed. He has to leave home. He's sent into exile. He's sent into, and this corresponds with the original Lion King, he's sent into this place where it's like, Hakuna Matata, no worries. I have all the luxuries, right? Think about Andrew Tate now. Think about the money, the women, the cars, the finance. Simba is thrust into this exile where he has everything he could ever ask for. He's living in paradise, and yet he doesn't feel at home because he's not home, right? And in Beyonce's retelling of it, Simba actually has to learn that all of that excess is not going to be able to fulfill the void that he is experiencing and has been experiencing because of the death of his father. I mean, it's crazy actually how these two things correlate. And so, in Black is King, Simba ends up finding himself, he finds Nala, right? He finds a wife, right? Not like, clubbing and partying with as many women as possible. But he finds a wife who builds a home with him. And then he's able to come back home, defeat Scar, and he has the homecoming. He returns home. Andrew Tate has not returned home. And if you look at his tweets, he talks about how like he's experienced, he literally has a tweet where he says, war is the only thing I've ever known. Internally, he is at war with himself. He has not had this homecoming that traditionally, when young men had tribal fathers who are able to contain this wounding and return, the return piece is very, very important. And he never returned. And all of the antics and all of the excess and all of the misogyny is symptomatic of the failure or the absence of home, the existential experience of homelessness that is present within Andrew Tate's psyche.
So Andrew Tate is homeless.
Yes.
I can tell him that.
Yes.
That's super insightful into the aspect of him not having a home and making those connections, and the relationship with his father and the mentality. It makes sense that it would grow out of some sort of void of not feeling or not having a place, not having like something is missing.
Yeah.
The father son relationship, the lack of a mentor. And
it's complicated too because his father made him a fighter, right? His father threw him into martial arts very early on. His father is the reason why he's so successful at kickboxing. His father is the reason why he prioritizes being a good fighter and being able to defend yourself and all these things. And yet there's other elements that are part of what it means to be a father that he didn't get from his father.
Yeah. I think that you are going to have Mike Tyson on your podcast and
go.
plant the seed in his head, and Mike Tyson will become a mentor to Tate when he leaves prison.
Oh my God. I love it.
And Beyonce will see that and be like, I wonder what made Mike Tyson change his mind, like what made him want to go mentor Tate.
Yeah.
And that will be the genesis of your friendship, best friendship
with Beyonce.
Yes. I'm putting it out into the universe.
Heard it here first, everyone.
Yes. I think that is a great way to end off, to come full circle. Completely lost track of time, which is always a great sign that it's an entertaining, fun conversation. So thank you again so much, Chloé, for making the trip. And is there... What are the best places for people to keep up with your thoughts, Theory of Enchantment, things that you're publishing?
Yeah, so people can check out theoryoфenchantment.com if they want to get involved and take up the practice themselves. You can also follow me on Substack. I write regularly there. Just my name, Chloé Valdary. And finally, I have a podcast called The Heart Speaks, where you can see episodes, video essays on my YouTube channel.
Definitely go check that out, especially Mike Tyson. If you're listening, make it happen. Chloé, thank you so much. This has been a blast.